And I feel like I should do the Friends of the Library spiel, even though this isn't the Friends of the Library. But if you don't belong, will you please join us this year? Barbara and I are both on the board, and we've had a splendid year, and we would love to have you join us. So I'm Roberta Isleib, a.k.a. Lucy Burdette, and this is my pal, Barbara Ross. You want to tell about you first?
Sure. Hello, everybody. It's so great to see you here. When I got up this morning, it was so cold. I was like, oh, no. It's going to be us and two people making up questions.
And that would be Bill and John.
Bill and John, our husbands. We always joke that they could actually sit in these chairs and do our whole spiel. They've heard them so many times. My name is Barbara Ross. I am the author of a series of mysteries called the Maine Clambake Mysteries. The 10th one comes out in May. And we're here today to talk about a different series of mine, the Jane Darrowfield Mysteries.
Okay, and I am Lucy Burdette, and my 20th book came out last fall, and that was a thriller called Unsafe Haven, which Michael asked me to talk about. But we will answer any questions about the other series.
Absolutely.
Well. It's really fun to be here with Barb because every year in Key West we have what we call our business lunch, and that's where we
business lunch.
There might be a mojito involved. I don't know. But we discuss the state of the publishing world and what we're going to write and when we might retire, which looks like never at this point.
Right.
So we can get a jump on those questions here.
Right. It's basically an unabashed gossip fest that goes on for...
So we haven't set up too much of a structure, but we each have questions to ask each other. So I'm going to start.
Okay.
If that's okay. It seems like ever since I've been writing, which was the first book came out in 2002, that middle-aged and older sleuths are just not in demand. It's no longer the times of Agatha Christie. Except for if you all have read Richard Osman, The Thursday Murder Club, and his new one is called,
something else.
Yeah.
The man who
died twice.
The man who died twice.
And that is a group of 70-somethings in a retiree village that has become hugely popular.
Because they're really funny.
Yeah, they are funny. But so that's my first question. Your Kirkus review described your character, Jane Darrowfield, as soothing, sturdy company.
Which is an insult, by the way.
But
which Kirkus is known for.
Yeah, but it's also perfect. She is sturdy company, but she's also not a young woman. So I wondered if you thought about the age of the character when you were planning the book and how it feels to write a protagonist that's closer to our age than our granddaughters.
That's a really good question. I very much thought about the character from a craft perspective. When you write amateur sleuth mysteries, which Lucy and I both write in the Maine, the hardest part is always how do you get the character involved in the investigation? Because any sane one of us, if we stumbled over a body, would call 911 and scream and swear until the police showed up and leave as promptly as possible after that. So the way you get the sleuth involved is always a trick. So I had this idea of Jane Darrowfield, my main character in this series, being a professional busybody. And I very much thought of her as an older sleuth because she's my homage to Miss Marple. I thought about Miss Marple, who inspired me so tremendously when I was young, and I thought, well, an American Miss Marple would be divorced, not single, and she would have learned everything she knows, not in St. Mary Mead by observing the villagers, but in corporate America. And then it also raised the question of what is old. Because Miss Marple is old from the time we meet her in 1927 until we say goodbye in 1976. But for me, old isn't old, right?
Right.
And the older I get, the less old gets. So I wanted to reflect all of that in my professional busybody. She's paid by neighbors and friends to solve sort of vexing problems that aren't appropriate for the police. And that's what pulls her into the murders.
Okay, and just a follow-up question then. Do you find it easier to write her character than your younger character, Julia, in the Clambake Mysteries?
In the early Clambake Mysteries, Julia is my daughter's age. However, my daughter is aging in real time, and Julia's aging in book time, so my daughter is now older than Julia. Not much, though. In the early days, I was obsessed, and I would constantly ask my daughter, well, would you say this, or would you say that? Apparently, you would not say slacks. She would only say pants, which was news to me. Things like that. But as the books have gone on, her voice has become more my voice, and, you know, she's just old for her age. I've learned to live with it.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the background of this book, because Unsafe Haven is a thriller, unlike a traditional mystery, which is what you're best known for. So could you talk a little bit about how you came to write this book and also how it came to be published?
Yes, because it's a long and winding road.
As always,
Yeah.
right?
So the book is called Unsafe Haven, and it is published by Severn House Press, which is a company that publishes mostly for libraries, starting in England and then coming to the U.S. So I looked back in my notes. I started thinking about this book in 2009. So, and I had questions in my inbox that I saved about young women who gave their babies away, who had a baby and then gave it away. There was one, not by adoption, but by leaving it somewhere. So there was one at the Key West Hilton where the baby was found in the trash in the bathroom. There was a baby that was found in a creche scene in New York, and the whole thing just fascinated me. Who would go to all the agony of having a child and then stick it somewhere like that? It must be someone really desperate in some way, which is really good for a book, to have somebody desperate. So that was the beginning of it, and I have always written in the first person, just the one character telling the story. In this case, there were 3 different characters. The young girl, Addie, who had the baby, a woman in her 20s, Elizabeth, who has just been dumped almost at the altar, and then an older detective, Jack Meigs, who was in my advice column series. So I guess it took me 10 years to figure out how to write from 3 points of view. And then there's a little bit of the bad guy in there, but not too much. So in 2016 or so, the the publisher of the Key West Mysteries had dropped all the cozies in their stable, including mine. But my agent was able to place them with another publisher, so I no longer had time to struggle with this other book, so I set it aside. In fact, she'd given me a lot of feedback, and I said, this is too hard. She wants something different than what I want. Forget about it. And then she called a year ago and said, oh, by the way, I sold that book. So that's the craziness of how it happened. And luckily, Severn House gave me a really good editor, which is so helpful. So we were able to fix that book up in a way that I was happy with, and hopefully readers will be too. So that's the long, short story.
The long and winding road is so typical.
Yeah. Well, these people who say there's one on our blog today who wrote a book in 3 months and then it got published, and we're just not familiar with that.
No.
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you another question. In both of your series, Jane Darrowfield and Julia Snowden, the police seem willing to accept their help, even though they're amateur sleuths. They don't go crazy when these women butt into the investigations, which I have trouble with. So I wondered how you managed that. Did you plan it? And it seems like it works out well, but I don't think the Key West police would want me to help them.
So I talked a little bit about the challenge of an amateur sleuth and why they engage in the investigation. And it's a trope that many authors rely on, that the reason they do is because the police are incompetent or fools. And you see that particularly in Golden Age mysteries where there are class differences, where the sleuths are upper class and the cops are very much working class. So I didn't want to do that. I was your Key West, my Busman's Harbor, Maine mysteries are based on a real town, Booth Bay Harbor, where we had a house. I knew the cops. They were cops, but they weren't idiots by any stretch of the imagination. And so I didn't want the cops to be fools. So my only hope was for them to eventually realize that my sleuth could uniquely offer insights into into what was happening that weren't available to the police. And that's kind of how that partnership gets formed. And it's very much a tit-for-tat kind of thing. Well, I'll tell you a little something about what the medical examiner has discovered if you'll tell me what the relationship is between so-and-so and so-and-so. So that's kind of how that works, I think.
So, yeah, that makes sense. And my character, there's another trope, which is having a boyfriend or a husband who's in the cops. So that's the route that I've gone down. But the thing that I'm learning from you about is that the police don't always have to just reject everything an amateur sleuth brings to the table, because people will tell regular people something that they might not tell the cops, and so that helps with our storytelling.
Right, exactly. That's exactly. So I was really interested during the Key West Speaker Series when Tom Perrotta spoke about how it takes 2 ideas to make a novel. So he talked about in election how the school government election was kind of an allegory for the 1992 U.S. election, but it wasn't a novel till he had the idea or saw the idea of a school official principal who was willing to give up everything because he was so incensed in what he was seeing. And that brought me back to Stephen King in On Writing says the same thing, that it takes 2 ideas to make a novel. For example, in Carrie, he became very interested in how telekinetic power often attaches itself to teenage girls, and he combined that with what he saw of bullying and cliquishness where he was teaching. So I had the feeling, reading Unsafe Haven, that there were two ideas there, because there's another main character in addition to the girl who gives up her baby. And I was wondering what the inspiration was for this.
So maybe there actually were three ideas, because there is the girl who, she gives birth. This isn't giving much away because it's in the first chapter, so you won't be surprised too early. But she is running away from a forced sex relationship to hoping someone else will save her. And she goes into labor on the subway and has the baby, and then is in a panic about what to do. So when the subway door opens, she thrusts this very new baby into the arms of a woman who looks like someone who could take care of her. This is the woman who's just been dumped at the altar and does not know what's happening in her own life. So there's that story, and I think the fact that she had everything planned. She's a medical student. She was getting married on New Year's Eve to an old boyfriend. Everything was going to be just like that. And this baby throws it all into the air and draws her in a way that if she was actually getting married, she might have immediately turned it over to the cops and done nothing more. So, and then the girl follows her, so that's how they get intertwined further. But also there is the cop, who is from my advice column series, which is out of print now, but you can find an ebook and sometimes floating around a hard copy. But I always loved this guy. He wasn't the point of view character, but I really liked him. And he had a wife who was very ill, who died at the end of one of the books. And so he is drawn into this story. He has a stepdaughter who's the same age as the girl who's just given birth, whom he's really struggling with. So they all come in wounded and become this little trio that's not really working together, but in the end they have to. So it was interesting, to say the least. It's so different when you're writing from one point of view. Obviously, you can only write what that character sees. Our friend Hank Ryan used to describe it as you have blinders on, and so you could only have in the story either what she heard or what she sees in that point of view. And it's hard in some ways, because you're always trying to figure out how I can get action in. She has to be there,
right,
or else hear about it.
Right.
Whereas with these three characters, if you're done with a scene, you can just hop to the next one, and it's easy in some ways to keep things moving.
Yeah, that exactly. And that sort of, well, I'll save that for another question. I have to say, though, I love Jack Meigs, too.
Oh, good.
And in a short story, Last Mango in Paradise, you bring him to Key West, where he is a fish out of water here.
He is a fish out of water. It was actually the other story called, not Last Tango in Paradise, but the first line starts something like, Jack Meigs knew he'd hate Key West the minute he was greeted by a taxi driver with a parrot on his shoulder. He said, well, that's so Key West. Either you love it or you hate it.
And so Jack Meigs, right? He would just loathe that.
So the next question I had for you is about since we're supposed to be focusing on these books that Michael told us to talk about.
As if Michael has any power over what we talk about. He's sitting there thinking, yeah, good luck to me.
So there's there are two books in that series so far, and is there another one coming? To be determined.
To be determined.
Okay. So there's an interesting backstory that we're left hanging on, and I was wanting to hear more about how you planned that, if you planned it, and your thoughts about how much readers want to hear about backstories of these characters in a mystery.
Well, that's a really interesting question. So I don't think it's a spoiler to tell you that Jane Darrowfield, the protagonist in this series, who, as Roberta has said, is a woman who's retired slightly early, but not, she's very close to retirement age when she retires. And she and her only son, she has a bad marriage in her backstory, and she and her only son are estranged. And the reason for that, from a character perspective, is because in the mysteries, being a professional busybody, she's going around and fixing things for people. And in the normal course of her normal practice, they're small things, like someone has a regular hairdresser and their hairdresser's sick, and her sister works in the chair next to her, so she goes to her sister and her hair is much better, and she wants to switch hairdressers but stay in the same salon. Everybody's nodding, right? Like this is the most difficult relationship in your life. So they hire Jane to go explain this and make sure it all comes out okay. So she's this little Miss Fix-It. There's another one where a cat has moved next door to the neighbors, prefers the neighbor's house, and that gets the neighbors all in an uproar. So she's going around sort of fixing things for people, not butting in, but fixing things. And I thought it was important that she have something big in her life that wasn't fixed and wasn't addressed. And every once in a while, her very good friends, she has 3 very good friends she's played bridge with for over 30 years in the book, which Charlotte was just telling me. I get all of my bridge advice, Charlotte, from my friend Marty, who plays bridge with Charlotte. Every once in a while, her very close friends will say to her, you're going around fixing all this stuff. So that was the reason for that. The reason it's that problem is because parental estrangement and estrangement with a child is something people are very reluctant to disclose and talk about, yes. But it happens more than you would suspect. And so that made it an interesting subject.
It's really painful.
Yeah.
Especially her with her fix-it character.
Right.
Could I just say something about the cat? I know you stole that from me.
I did?
Yes. Because there was a cat that lived next door to me. You may have even met him, a big gray, beautiful cat with a white collar. And I loved that cat. And he would come over and I would let him in. And he would have a snack and then he'd sleep in my house. And then the neighbor would call and say, "Have you seen Yoda?" And so then I would put him out the front door and say, "Oh." And eventually he was 9 when he moved in with us for good. So I'm pretty sure you took that from me.
So there's apparently cat estrangement is more common than I had realized. This is a story from my own life. When I was a teenager, the cat next door, this will disclose embarrassing things about my age, but the daughter of the woman who lived next door, her husband went to Vietnam, and she moved back into the house next door to us with 2 German shepherds and her cat, and the cat that lived there decided and 2 small children. The cat that lived there decided she had it with that and moved into our house.
So maybe you didn't take it. Anyway. Okay.
So I had no idea cat estrangement was such a common thing. So in a traditional mystery, the central question that drives the action is who done it, right? But in a thriller like Unsafe Haven, or a suspense novel, I'm not sure, you can tell us what you think it is. The question that drives the action is, what is going on here? And can I figure it out and fix it before either something awful happens to me or to someone I love, or in the case of an international spy thriller, before the world ends.
Right.
So how did you find the writing of something with that as a central question different from writing a traditional mystery?
I think that the pace is a lot quicker in a I would call it suspense. It's fine to call it a thriller, but I don't even really like reading thrillers, so I'll call it.
So it's
suspense.
unlikely that you've written one.
Yeah, it's unlikely. But I think the pace has to just always be moving. It can't be a lot of sitting around having pastries on Houseboat Row the way I can do in the other books, and it has to do with something awful is going to happen at the end if you don't move quickly. So I think, and we know pretty early on who the bad people are, and that they're not going to just let this go by. The fact this girl and her baby were going to be worth a lot of money because of this scheme that was going on. So it's not okay for her to have escaped, and it's really not okay for this baby to be missing. So it's that there's a ticking clock.
Yes.
And there's a lot at stake, which I think is not as prominent in a cozy mystery series.
Yeah, so this takes place over 4 or 5 days?
Yeah, it's fast.
Yeah, it is fast,
Yeah.
really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to have people write in and say, oh, I finished it in a night. And I'm going, oh my gosh, it took me 12 years to write it.
I know, I get that all the time.
Slow down a little bit.
I know, it's meant to, I think it's meant as a compliment,
I
right?
so,
I read
yeah,
it in a
yeah.
day, but I'm always like, oh.
Yeah, so we had an interesting conversation last week. How are we on time, Bill? Oh, well, we'll hurry up then. We had an interesting conversation about research because we had some friends in town, and they were the only friends that we could get to go on the Tiki Boat cruise. I don't know if you've been on it, but I needed to go on it because there's a scene in the next Key West book. So, and Barbara was saying, yeah, I understand that, because some things you really have to have been there to get the feel of it. And in Unsafe Haven, it was all familiar to me because most of it takes place in Connecticut. So I didn't need to do too much research other than the subway scenes. But tell us about you had an example of research that you and Bill did for your last book.
Yeah, I mean, in COVID times, thank goodness for the internet. So you can walk down streets with Google Maps, and you can research organizations and shops, and you can do a lot on the internet, which has really been so critical, especially these last few years. But, there are a lot of series set in Maine. I always say that my friends and I kill more people fictionally in Maine every year than are actually murdered in Maine. And some of them are written by people who live in Texas and have never been there, and it's always kind of interesting, and my Maine born and bred friends will claim they can always tell the difference. But for the novella that I'm writing now, that's due March 1st, I had a scene that was set in a town way up in Maine, Benedicta, Maine, which was a utopian community built for Irish Catholics in the 1830s. And I couldn't, I did all that, the Google Maps thing, but I just couldn't get it. I just couldn't feel it. And I made my husband drive me 3 hours up so I could walk around the church graveyard and eat in a diner, and 3 hours back, because I just couldn't feel it. And there was one of the research books I had read said that the graveyard was in the shadow of Mount Katahdin. And I just, no matter how I looked at it, I couldn't. Can you really see Mount Katahdin from there? Well, you could, but I had to go there to figure that out.
So then you go home and write like mad because it gives you all kinds of ideas.
Yeah, I was taking notes on my phone as we were driving up 95, yeah.
Like back to the Tiki Hut cruise, we would not have known there was a school of dolphins out there. And John saw a big stingray leap out of the water and slap the water.
Oh my goodness.
And then we saw a fire on Wisteria Island. So just these things that you can't get from the internet. So anyway, well, so let's stop and see if anybody has a question for us. Yes, Marcia. Okay, so the question is, knowing there are constraints with a cozy mystery series, what could I let go of, and did I enjoy it? Well, for example, you would never show any part of a birth scene in a cozy mystery. You might see the baby like wrapped up in a swaddling.
All cleaned up and tidy.
All cleaned up, and it would be in the hospital where they're handing it over to the mother. So anything dark and gritty like that, any kind of shoot 'em up, and there are some very bad actors with very bad motives. We have bad people in our books, but not like this. So it was different, and yeah, it did stretch me a little bit. It's funny, somebody wrote a review and said, at the end, everything is tied up as well as it could be. And I said, that's my cozy mystery self, because I always want there to be a happy ending. So I want something good to happen to that poor girl who had the baby, and the one who got dumped at the altar, and progress to be made with Meigs and his stepdaughter. So I couldn't help that. What other questions?
Any other questions?
Because we have more things we could say. Yes, back there. Oh, that's Ellen. Yeah, that's the good. That was on my list. So what do we read? Do you want to start?
So I wrote series mysteries because I love series mysteries, and I read a lot of them. One of the things that happens when you get into this business is you do a lot of required reading, for blurbs, for panels, for all kinds of things. So I do read a lot of series mysteries, but I also I like thrillers as well, and I read outside. Well, this is like my sad confession that during the pandemic I became addicted to Outlander in a really sick way. So I'm only reading to the series, but I've read those books more times than I really care to admit.
Okay. Well, and also I should say, because of the Key West Library Friends Speaker Series, I've read things I would never have picked up. So Barbara, you may have heard this on Zoom. Barbara did a wonderful interview with Sean Cosby, S.A. Cosby, who wrote Razorblade Tears and Blacktop Wasteland. So I picked up Blacktop Wasteland, and it is really violent. It's really rough and so good. It was amazing.
Yes,
so
very
that
good.
was way out of what I would normally read. And then John got for Valentine's Day Razorblade Tears. I said to Emily, this isn't really a love story to get.
Well, it is.
There's love in it. It's a different, it's not a romance.
Yeah, there's love in it.
Yeah. And now I'm reading, and please come next Monday to our Zoom at 6 o'clock, Charlene Harris, whom I've known forever. She's in the mystery community, and but I've not read her books. So I'm reading An Easy Death, which is about a girl who is a gunny, meaning she protects people. It's in this wild, it's something I would never read because it's kind of science fiction mixed with Western. But she's such a talented writer that I'm enjoying that. So what are you reading exactly right this moment?
What am I reading exactly right this moment? I am reading the latest Elizabeth George, which I can't remember the title of.
Okay, so a little bit of everything, yeah.
Thank you.
I'm reading it too. What's the name of it?
What's the name of it?
Something Too High.
Something to Hide.
That's a good title.
That is a very good title.
Yeah.
How about the names you give characters? I know sometimes those have significance with the family members, but I understand the names can be very important things.
So the question is about how we name our characters and what meaning they have. You want to go first?
So many characters, usually small characters, will just jump up fully blown with their names, with their personalities, with their quirks. They just appear that way. And other characters, when Meg Cabot was talking yesterday about going through the Social Security rolls by year, looking for the most popular first names in the year the character was born. Other characters, sometimes I've changed the names so frequently that I can't use find and replace to fix them after the first draft because they've had so many names. And a lot of times I can't remember. I have a Daniel Kearney in this novella, which is only 100 pages, so you'd think I could. Whether it's spelled with an E or not is really an open question at this point. So sometimes they're very obvious. With the Maine Clambake Mysteries, I wrote those as a spec proposal. So I wrote a proposal for the first 3 books and 3 chapters that was submitted around to publishers by my agent. And I was determined, because it was a purely speculative venture, that I wouldn't think too much, because I am an overthinker. And I was just grabbing names, and I actually named my protagonist. I gave her the first and middle name of my niece. And I finally got around to asking my niece this summer what she thought about that, and she didn't really think anything about it, so it was fine.
And I have in the Key West series quite a few real people's names, and those are, some of them are a nod to them, like Steve Torrance, who is a minister and a police officer who's been so helpful. So he's a character. Some of them are other, like Lorenzo, who's the tarot card reader. He's based on a real person. You get into a little trouble, like Martha Hubbard, who, if you were at Sam Siffin fundraiser, did the cooking for us. She's become a character. And then someone at the gym we go to is just dying to have her name in the book. Her name is Martina. So Martina and Martha are, I have to leave them, but you'll have to work a little harder to keep them separate. Or maybe somebody has a nickname, I don't know. But and sometimes you offer a character name for auction, so
Right.
And then you're stuck with whatever they give you.
Right. So does she want to be a good guy, or doesn't she care? What if you killed her off in the first chapter?
She hasn't specified. I don't give her too much to say. Yeah, there's another question. The titles, how do we come up with them?
So I think I've had an unusual career in that I have titled all my books. It's not uncommon for the publisher to choose the title, but I have chosen the title of all my books. The Maine Clambake Mysteries are always a past tense verb and a preposition. So they're clammed up, boiled over, muscled out, fogged in. Always some Maine and often seafood aspect, steamed open, shucked apart is the latest. And those I have a list of prepositions of which I am running out rapidly, and I will occasionally just ask in my author newsletter for suggestions. The Jane Darrowfield titles are a little trickier. I named both of them. They're too long, and in my mind, they're clearly tongue-in-cheek. So one is Jane Darrowfield, Professional Busybody, and the other is Jane Darrowfield and the Mad Woman Next Door, which to me is clearly tongue-in-cheek, but there's a whole screed in an Amazon review about how disrespectful that is to people who have been stalked. So,
And mine, usually I send the title into the publisher and they change it. So, except for Unsafe Haven, that was mine, and it's a good one.
was it always yours?
It was always mine.
From the very beginning.
Maybe it was Unsafe Harbor for a while, so it was always close, but that's the only one.
Oh, I like that.
And if I get stuck, I go on Facebook and say, I need help with this title. It's got Scotland, it's got this, it's got that. And 300 people come up with amazing ideas. So that's where a scone of contention came from.
From Facebook.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yes.
Great title. Did you enjoy writing, putting your characters in Scotland?
So the question was, did I enjoy putting my characters in Scotland? So this is book 11 in the Key West series, and it starts in Key West and it ends in Key West. But other than that, and this was my pandemic book, so other than that, they went on the trip to Scotland that was supposed to be a honeymoon that John and I had taken in 2019. So it was really, really a relief to be able to relive that trip instead of studying which vaccine was going to come out first, you know? So I loved it. I loved every bit of it. Some people complain that the main thing they like about the series is Key West, and so why did you ruin it by taking them to Scotland? And other people have complained, this is not a honeymoon, you wouldn't take Miss Gloria. And I said, well, you don't know them then, because they would take Miss Gloria, and they do. So, yeah, and plus, two wonderful characters, the Scone sisters from that book, are now big characters in the one I'm writing. So it's all worked out well for me. What time do we have, Bill?
10:22.
Okay, so we could take one more question?
Sure.
Yeah.
You both mentioned your reviews that you have. How do you deal with reviews?
Yeah, so the question is, how do we deal with reviews?
So I have friends who don't read their reviews at all, ever. I read them obsessively. It's kind of my little break when I'm writing. I'll go check. Amazon very neatly puts them all in one place, so you can check the new ones. And Clammed Up just ticked over to 1,000 reviews last weekend, which I was very excited about. Goodreads, you have to hunt around, so I only check till there are 100, and then I walk away from it. But I learned, I think, early on that reviews they so much more reflect the person writing the review than they have anything to do with your book. They're buried somewhere on Amazon is a review of Clammed Up, the first book in the Maine Clambake series, that says, this book is about two sisters who will never, ever get along. This book, it's not about that at all. I mean, it's just not in the book. So I thought, well, it's not about that, but I know maybe what you should talk to your therapist about.
Plus, I read them also, but I learn things from them. I learn what, in the aggregate, people really love. And for example, Miss Gloria, talk about writing older characters. I had no idea she would become the most popular character, and she's 80-something. So then I learned,
bet you wish you had made her a little younger.
well, I'm just not worrying about it. We're slowing things down. She's going to live to 100, I'm sure. So yeah, so she gets a bigger role because she's been that popular. Yeah. Oh no, you cannot kill a cat. No, you cannot.
Yes,
and
you can't kill a cat in a cozy. That's
yes. Although speaking of things people write, in the first book, Evan Rude disappears and she's living in a borrowed houseboat and frantic. Well, somebody wrote, she obviously doesn't care about the cat because she didn't look very hard for it. Okay, well, you were solving murders. So. Anyway, so we really appreciate you coming. Barbara is a nighttime person and I'm a morning person, so this is our only overlap
Right.
right now. So thank you so much, and thank you, Michael, for inviting us. And we have books for sale.